So we just want to give some responses to the February forecast. Roughly half $500 million down. That's a significant number. We heard some of the comments from the governor and the Democrats about how that's severe, it's dire. It is a big issue. And I want to say, if it was my home and suddenly I had a 2% cut or a 1% cut in my salary, and then I came home and talked to my wife about what we would do, what we would not do is immediately go out and binge spend. And when I hear what the governor is proposing and the speaker, it's significant spending increases when you have a downturn, and we just think that's very, very unwise. The two things that we really can control here is spending and taxes. And if you, we'll talk later about our budget principles, but one of those budget principles was protecting the taxpayer, but nowhere in there did we talk about a tax decrease. We just talked about protecting the taxpayer, and we'll overlay those budget principles as we move forward, but those are some initial comments.
Yeah, I think, obviously, I think this was something that folks, unfortunately, were somewhat expecting based on the actual revenues that we had seen come in since the November forecast. We'd lost about $400 million worth of projected revenue just since November. I'm actually surprised this isn't worse. When you look at where the losses are, it's pretty easy to see that it's income tax. And it's pretty easy to see that it's the high income earners who are now moving their income out of state. And I know Governor Dayton assured us that this would never happen, but the reality is the chickens are coming home to roost on the governor's tax increases. And they're not coming home to roost, unfortunately. They're taking their nest eggs and they're roosting in other states. And that's what's driving this potential deficit in the future. We obviously have grave concerns about what got us into this situation. It's pretty obvious now that what got us here was tax increases and spending increases. And I can assure you that the way out of this isn't tax increases and spending increases. We need to be very cautious, not just today, but also at the end of session when we're finalizing the state's budget. This is heeding a warning that we cannot ignore. If what we see is what we think is happening is what's happening, that if wealthy Minnesotans are relocating to other states and we're losing that revenue, we will not get those people back. And we have to rebuild that revenue from the ground up by growing a state's economy. And we will not grow the state's economy by increasing taxes and increasing spending to force us to increase taxes. So it's time that we all get realistic here and be prudent about what the right course is moving forward.
Good afternoon, Julie Rosens, the Senate Finance Chair. And now that the final numbers are in, it's a little bit sobering, a little rude awakening. And now is the time for the finance chairs to begin their work. So they're going to be off working on the principles that the majority leader just mentioned. One is taking care of people. That's a priority for our caucus. Protecting the taxpayer, controlling the spending, it's out of control, and getting done on time with accountability and transparency. And I'd just like to say, too, that the annualized growth in spending is 2.9%, but revenue is only 2.3%. So the long term of our spending is outgrowing our revenues. And that's the story of the day.
Questions?
Mr. Minority Leader, what's your evidence that people are actually leaving? This just came up and budget officials said this is not happening.
Well, did they say it's not happening? Because when we asked them, they wouldn't say that. And I think that's been the case. Look at what's happening in New York State. All you have to do is look at the evidence. We've got the lowest unemployment in 2 decades. We have wages that are still increasing, but somehow we're losing forecasted income tax revenue. Or, the only real explanation there is that some of our taxpayers are no longer paying in the state. We can,
Because they're aging?
Yeah, they're just retired.
I mean, it's an aging state. Yeah, they talk about the demographic, but
well,
this is the demographic.
And I'm sure that they want to deny that wealthy Minnesotans are leaving to other states. Last year, the wealthiest Minnesotan left Minnesota. He's no longer a taxpayer in this state. He's a taxpayer now in Florida, where they have no state income tax. We are literally paying people to leave this state. And we can't rely on our weather to keep retirees here anymore. We have to be competitive. I know that these changes at the federal level, while they benefited 95% of Minnesotans, the reality is because of those changes and the fact that we haven't complied at the state level, the wealthiest Minnesotans are bearing the brunt of that here in this state, and they will. There is a threshold. I've been warning of that for 6 years now. There is a threshold where they will move their income and shelter it in a state that has no state income tax.
Wouldn't we have seen that tax? Wouldn't we have seen that tax flight soon? Well, but can I just real quick? Just
I'll add it first. We didn't get a definitive answer from them. We did ask that question. But you can look to New York, which is also a very high tax state for the high income earners. And the Democratic governor Bloomberg there said that they were leaving their state. So we don't have the data yet, but we can look to another state very similar to Minnesota that they are confirming that that is what's happening.
But wouldn't we have seen that tax flight sooner? Those tax increases passed 5 years ago. There's been a string of surpluses since.
We asked this morning if they had that data, and they told us they didn't have the data to show that people weren't leaving the state. So I don't know how they told you that, but I'll let Garofalo step in. Go ahead.
But it's related to the SALT deductibility. The lack of deductibility, of full deductibility of state and local taxes. I mean, that's what's causing people to be paying more in taxes. That's a federal.
So, first of all, we have really high income taxes in Minnesota. The $10,000 cap at the federal level on state and local taxes impacts our wealthy taxpayers more. So, this idea that somehow there's a bottomless trough of money and the rich are just going to sit here and keep paying it. I mean, the chicken, as Minority Leader Daudt said, the chickens have come home to roost. We lost $370 million in income tax revenue in 3 months. I mean, and we're not even in a recession. The economy is growing. Sales tax revenues are stable. Unemployment is going down, and we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars in income tax revenue. So, Brian, did you have a more technical question? You want me to? I mean, workforce participation is up. Sales tax revenues are coming in at forecast. So the reality is, whatever people want to think about the Democrat tax increases, what they did is they put all our eggs in one basket. They put a whole bunch of the tax code on a very narrow sliver of people, and now they're leaving.
I'm just trying to understand the linkage between the Dayton increase from 5 years ago and this one. And you're saying it's because the Dayton increase happened and now they no longer have the buffer of the state and local deductions, so they're feeling the brunt. That's why you think they're leaving now.
Right, because what used to happen, so it's a cumulative factor, but what happened before is that whatever tax increases those individuals had, they were able to write off a portion of them. Now they can't. So I don't really care if people want to blame Mark Dayton or blame someone else, but I will get mad at people who deny it's not happening, who claim that this isn't actually occurring. Just go out to Bear Path and see how many houses are for sale. Well, it's a gated community, so you can't, but, so.
Mr. Majority Leader, can we talk about the demographics on the workforce? Because they said that really is the most persistent concerning, looking forward, that Minnesota's workers are aging, our unemployment is down, and our workforce is down as well, and that it's just going to be a collision course, and we need to attract new people to move here, and especially immigrants. They called out that we cannot fill these jobs without bringing in immigrants here.
So we all agree that we have a workforce shortage and we have an aging of our population, so I think we can work together on those issues. It is attracting other people to Minnesota. How do we do that? Well, we have to be competitive on our tax structure, we have to be competitive on our regulation structure, but it's a great state to be in, so we have to work at attracting them. We do want all legal immigration. We want lots of legal immigration. That's a place that we can agree on. And then we have to figure out other ways to get people into the workforce. One of them, there are people, I don't know what the exact number is yet, but that are able to work but are on our welfare system. Somehow we have to get them back into the workforce. There are going to be solutions that we'll have to figure out together there. So a number of things we can do. One of the other things that I thought of is if we allow our state government to become more efficient, we don't need as many state workers going forward, and they also can get into the private sector. So lots of things we can do, but we have to figure out how to work together.
Is your president helping attract new workers and immigrants to this country and to this state?
I can only speak to his State of the State speech where he said, or State of the Union speech, excuse me, where he said we want all of the immigrants that we can have coming into America, but we want it legally. And so I support that issue.
Mr. Leader, to the issue that your House friends teed up, are you going to be seeking to reverse that top tier or get rid of the fourth tier that they say is pushing people away?
At this point, right now, with the forecast that we have, our goal right now is going to be to figure out how do we live within our means when we have very little money going forward. You look out 4 years and we're actually negative spending, and so that's my first job, is to make sure we can live within our resources without raising taxes. That means that we have to figure out how to slow the growth of spending.
The governor says that this is now exactly the time to, what he calls, invest in new programs in transportation, including some tax hikes to generate more jobs. That's what his theory is, that this will move Minnesota forward.
I'm glad you thought it was a theory, because in the end, that runs counterproductive to what we should be doing. And earlier I gave the example of a home, and if a family suddenly has less income, you don't go out and suddenly spend more money. You tighten the belt and figure out how you're going to live within the resources you have. More tax increases are counterproductive. You could make that argument to me if we weren't in the top 5 tax states. We're already in the top 5, and so my goal is to get out of the top 10. I'm not interested in being in the bottom 10. We like a lot of things in Minnesota that we're willing to pay for, but we don't want to move up from where we are. We're already losing Minnesotans to other states.
If I can just jump in on that too, the governor's comment that he wants to create jobs to get us out of the problem doesn't really make sense. We have a workforce shortage right now, and we have the lowest unemployment rate in 2 decades. The problem isn't that we don't have jobs and don't have people in the workforce. The problem is that the high income earners are leaving the state of Minnesota, and that's really clear in this forecast.
Mr. Leader, the governor said Republicans' answer to everything is cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. Your response to that?
I don't think anybody up here is proposing to cut taxes today.
Well, how do you get out of the top 5 then?
Well, we would like to, but you can't cut taxes and create a deficit. That'll create that'll exacerbate the problem. What we're doing is talking about just being reasonable and using some common sense and not overtaxing and overspending. It's raising taxes and being the high tax state that got us into this problem. And what the governor's doing is wanting to put $3 billion of new taxes on top of Minnesotans who are already some of the highest taxed people in the country. That will only make this problem worse. And this revenue forecast clearly lays that out. That is exactly the wrong course of action right now. What we need to do is be prudent and try to grow our economy and build an economy by attracting new people into this state to help bolster our income tax revenues.
Mr. Majority Leader, can I follow up with you? The governor said specifically Republicans and you are saying no to transportation, no to education, no to health care, no to bonding. He said no is not a plan for the future.
Well, the fact is we are yes for education, yes for transportation, yes for bonding in its right time, which is typically the non-budget year. Always we look towards education and how do we make sure we do the best we can. In addition to spending increases, I'm also saying innovate. What are the things that we can do to make it more efficient with what we do? And transportation, both Kurt and I, last 2 years, we actually increased transportation funding ongoing. We took half the sales tax on auto parts. That now goes to roads and bridges. That is ongoing. So we are investing in the things that we believe Minnesota cares for.
Wiggle room on bonding, any chance you'll take some bonding?
In the non-bonding year, they're often.
They point out there's been a bonding bill every year the last 30 years except 2.
Yeah.
So they say it's a myth to say non-bonding.
In a non-budget year, there often is a small bonding bill, and we're going to have a discussion about that. But the major bonding bill, we want to get back to the every other year, which is where I think it should be.
You mentioned that in about 4 years out, the spending will be larger and with this projection than the money coming in. So with that in mind, in the Healthcare Access Fund, that's the same time that they project $919 million deficit about 4 years out. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it creates a real challenge for us, and that's why we have to figure out how to work together to bend the HHS spending curve. I may be wrong on this number, but I think it's about an 18% growth compared to the overall budget was 8 or 9%. And so how do we slow that is the big task that we all have before us. And so sick tax is going away, so now what do we do about it?
This would be for whoever wants to take on this. Why aren't we seeing wage growth? We've got this labor shortage, we've got whoever wants to tackle it. I mean, shouldn't we be seeing more wage growth? And they're even projecting that it's soft out into the out months and years.
I don't have the numbers on that if somebody else, you know.
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing wage growth. They're still projecting wage growth, but they're reducing the amount of increase that they were projecting.
Even what they're projecting is not as much as you would think when you have a labor supply situation like Minnesota has right
I
now.
mean, Minnesota isn't a very competitive place to do business anymore, and that's the reality. You know, we need to see that sort of wage growth, and if we don't have workers to fill jobs, it's tough to, you know, to see that sort of upward movement as well. The problem is we're taxing people way too much in this state, and our high wage earners have left, and a lot of those people are small business owners, and some of them are retirees that have substantial wealth, and we're seeing that wealth leave this state.
But if I need to hire somebody and I'm in a competitive employment situation, wouldn't paying more give me an advantage in getting the workers that I need? But we're not seeing that in any substantial way.
It would not surprise me long-term if rates do go up because we have a labor shortage. You find that people have to compete for employees, and so the benefits tend to go up, which is a good thing. Let me make one last comment before we go here, too. I will say that the governor and myself and Speaker Hartman are having good communication. There are some things that I think we'll announce in the next couple of days where progress is being made, and so the good news is we're not below the water on this. It's just that we have to pay attention to what we're doing, but there are some things that are moving forward, and I'm still optimistic.
Your counterpart.
Thanks, guys, we gotta wrap it up.
With Chair Rosen, your counterpart in the House in the next couple of weeks, he'll be kind of putting his cards on the table as to the target areas. What are you looking at in terms of timeline?
Well, we are having that discussion next week. As far as targets, there's no clear definition of when those are going to be set, so. But we're starting the conversation, and everyone is looking at, as I said, accountability, pressure points, where can they do with less? Because this budget, we can't increase spending. It's automatic increase in Health and Human Services of $1.5 billion, $711 million in E12, automatic increase. So this is not really a good day for the
So
budget.
stay tuned.
Thank you.